WWDC 2022 has just finished, I've got shed loads of notes, and I was completely wrong. I was really excited about WWDC this year, mainly because we had no idea really what was going to happen. The rumours were all a bit sketchy and there wasn't much information leading up to the event, and for me, that made it more exciting. Now, I could just sit here and go through all of the stuff they announced, but that would be quite a long, boring video. So rather than do that, I'm going to go through my notes and pick out the things that I found the most interesting. Before we get into it, a quick word from today's sponsor, which is NordVPN. And this is an app that I put on every Apple device, whether it's my MacBook, my iPhone, my iPad. NordVPN goes on pretty much straight away. And if you didn't know, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and it has some really compelling benefits. Put simply, it keeps your personal data safe online by hiding your IP address and keeping those pesky hackers out. For example, I rely on NordVPN when I'm working in coffee shops or in public places where there's a Wi-Fi connection that I don't know or fully trust. And NordVPN really is about as simple as it gets. There's a really fast install process and then a simple one-click process to get on any of their 5,000 plus servers across 60 countries. And NordVPN is really, really fast. In fact, speed tests confirm that it is the fastest VPN available. Even better, it works across macOS, Windows, iOS, Android, and Linux. There's also an awesome new feature called Threat Protection, which is available on the NordVPN desktop apps. And this guards your device against malicious websites, malware, trackers, and intrusive ads, even when you're not connected to a VPN server. You basically switch it on and it'll stay on. Another great thing about NordVPN is that it allows you to connect to your home country to access home country content when you're traveling abroad. Even better news, I've got an exclusive NordVPN deal for you. If you click the link in the description, you can find out more about NordVPN itself, but also grab access to that deal. And it's totally risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Let's get on to iOS 16. Now, one of the biggest changes they've made is to the lock screen, which doesn't sound that exciting, but the new design looks fantastic. Now, they call this the biggest update ever to the lock screen, which it clearly is. There's new ways to personalize it. You can use this really cool depth effect with portrait photos, where the person in the photo appears in front of the time, and you can swipe around to try out different styles, different color recognitions. Everything is built around complementing the main photo that you use, and it just looks really, really nice. And you can also add widgets to your lock screen now. And you access those widgets from a gallery, and from what we saw, they look like the same sort of widgets that you get on the home screen. They've just been redesigned for that new lock screen. And you can also create multiple lock screens, which is quite cool. And that kind of ties in with the focus modes. So if you want a different lock screen for a different focus mode, so for example, let's say you go into your kind of personal time focus mode, that can switch the lock screen to a different photo if you want to, a completely different design to the one that you might have when you're working. Now, notifications on the iOS lock screen are a bit of a mess, and I, along with lots of other people, were hoping they might do a big redesign around those notifications. And they have changed them a little bit, but not massively. But the headline feature was live activities, which enables you to stay on top of things as they happen in real time on your lock screen. And that means things like Uber deliveries, your workouts, sports scores, that kind of stuff. The Messages app has been updated quite a bit as well. I don't use Messages personally. In the UK, we tend to use WhatsApp. But if you do use Messages, you'll be glad to know that you can now undo a send, you can edit a message before Twitter, and you can mark messages as unread, which I know is a huge feature request. Then we had Wallet, and there was some interesting stuff in here, but being based in the UK, we don't get a lot of this stuff yet. So a lot of this is kind of US based, but the kind of headline features was the fact that the IDs and the driving license implementation in Wallet is now available in more states across the US. You can share hotel keys in messages, and Apple Pay got some really interesting updates as well. So a big one for retailers is Tap to Pay on the iPhone, which will arrive in the US later this month. And that basically means that you can take payments on an iPhone without any other hardware. There was also Apple Pay Later, which enables you to split a payment for something into 4 equal payments with no interest. That is really cool. Lastly, CarPlay has got a massive update. The next version, which is coming obviously with iOS 16, is a completely fully integrated version of CarPlay for your car. And that means you can view all of the car data, your speed, your revs, your heating, everything, even the radio tuning apparently, directly within CarPlay. So you never have to come out of CarPlay to control your car, basically. And I just wonder if this is a bit of a glimpse at what Apple has got planned with their own car technology, because we all know they're doing something fairly big in that regard. And this just looked like a completely seismic leap forward for CarPlay. I think this is the start of something very, very interesting in automotive from Apple. We'll see. Now, watchOS 9 is a fairly marginal update, but there is some interesting stuff in there, particularly if you're a runner. And it's all about running form. And basically, Apple is now giving you access to more metrics about your running. And it uses the Apple Watch's sensors to check all sorts of things like vertical oscillation, your arm swing, stride length, and even ground contact time. And pretty much all of those metrics can be added to the workout view, so you can check all of those vitals while you're running. And it even picks up things like common routes. So if you're always doing a very specific route, you can race against your old self the last time you did that route. If you're a runner, this next version of watchOS looks really interesting. They're also finally moving the workout stuff to the iPhone, which means you won't need an Apple Watch to track your workouts. Right, macOS. In fact, no, macOS had to take a bit of a back seat because we had a much bigger announcement first, which was the new M2 chip. Now, the focus once again is all about power efficient performance. It's a second generation of the M chip. It's 5 nanometers and it's got 25% more transistors than the M1. It's also got 100 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. That's 50% more than the M1. It can have up to 24 gigabytes of unified memory. The 8-core CPU is faster and more efficient than the M1. And it offers 18% greater performance than the M1 and 2 times more performance over a 10-core PC laptop. And even more impressively, the M2 can use 87% of its peak performance while using just a quarter of its power. That's what this chip is all about. The GPU has been taken up to 10 cores and it's 25% more performant than the M1 in standard operation and 35% more performant at its max output. And there's a next generation media engine which supports 8K at H.264 and allows you to play back multiple streams of 4K and 8K video. So it is quite a significant update over the M1. Now clearly that M2 chip needs to go into a Mac, and it went into a Mac that I did not think we'd see now. I thought we were going to see this later in the year. No, we now have a brand new MacBook Air. I thought it looked quite a bit like a kind of mini MacBook Pro. It's that very kind of squared off, chunky, slightly retro design. So that classic MacBook Air wedge has gone. Sorry if you loved that, I quite liked it. And we have a 20% reduction in volume over the old version. It's 11.3 millimeters thin, which is about half an inch, and it weighs 2.7 pounds. Now, when it came to colors, I think this was a bit of a letdown personally. There were no iMac type colors, no vibrant oranges, blues, etc. There was no white version, which is what I really, really wanted. Instead, we're getting silver, space grey, starlight, and midnight. Midnight looks quite cool. It's this very kind of dark colour, but the rest, they're just a bit dull, a bit boring. Now onto some of the vitals. It has 2 Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports, a liquid retina display with a notch. Now that notch won't matter, trust me, I've been using the MacBook Pro for a long time now. You don't know it's there. Having said that, it will still grab lots of attention, as we know, but if we put that to one side, that 13.6-inch display is 25% brighter, it's 500 nits, and it has 1 billion colours. So it sounds like a very nice update to the old screen. The webcam is a 1080p camera now, which apparently offers 2 times the resolution over the old model. We'll see about that. When it comes to audio, there are 4 speakers, there's a 3 mic array, and it supports spatial audio. There's 18 hours of battery life, and there is MagSafe. So we now have MagSafe on the MacBook Air, just as we have it on the new MacBook Pro. And there's also some interesting new charging options. There's a new USB port adapter, which has 2 USB connections, and the MacBook Air now supports fast charging with an optional 67-watt adapter, and it can get to 50% charge in just 30 minutes, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, it has got more expensive, so the new M2 MacBook Air starts at $1199. Now the M2 chip has gone into another Mac as well, and when they said this I thought, great, it's going to be the new Mac Mini. No, they've put it into the 13-inch Touch Bar MacBook Pro, and I cannot work this out at all. So this MacBook Pro is like I say, the old one with that Touch Bar. It's the only MacBook Pro still in existence that you can buy today with a Touch Bar, and for some reason they've decided to put the M2 chip into that. So you benefit from all that new M2 stuff, but in the oldest MacBook Pro you can still buy. It's a bit of a head scratcher. And that new, in inverted commas, MacBook Pro starts at $1299, so it's $100 more expensive than the MacBook Air, the M2 MacBook Air, but it's nowhere near as interesting. Now, I am going to skim over macOS because it was a fairly ho-hum update. It's going to be called Ventura, which is a great name, but it's got the headline feature, which is Stage Manager. Now, this is kind of a new way of multitasking. Basically, it automatically arranges all of your windows to the left-hand side and brings your app that you're currently using into what they call center stage in front of you. And then on the left-hand side, you can click the apps that are open and bring them into center stage. Any apps that have got multiple windows open are gathered into a single pile, as they call it, and you can cycle through that pile. You can then drag content, if you want, from your desktop into any of those apps in that left-hand pane, which was quite interesting. Mail got some pretty big updates as well. I don't use Mail personally, I use Spark, although this new version of Mail sounds a lot like Spark. So you can now undo sends, you can schedule sends, there's a big overhaul for search. I got a bit bored at that point, but it's just sounding like Mail is starting to be a bit more like the third-party options. Safari got some interesting updates as well, including shared tab groups, so you can now collaborate with others on your tab groups, which is quite a cool feature, and passkeys, which is a new method of logging into websites without a password. And this basically works by using cryptographic techniques and biometrics to create a unique digital key for a website, which can't be phished because it never leaves your device, it can't be leaked either, and it syncs across your devices via keychain. Now, Apple described the transition away from passwords as a journey, which basically means we're at the start of this process of getting away from using passwords all the time. So passkeys look very interesting. It's just very early days, so we'll see how it develops. And finally, continuity got two really cool updates. The first one is that you can now hand off a FaceTime call from, for example, your iPhone to your Mac, which is really useful. And the second one was continuity camera, which basically means you can use your iPhone as a webcam. So, for example, if you're not particularly happy with your studio display's webcam, like me, you can take your iPhone and use that instead. And it's completely wireless, completely frictionless. You just basically place your iPhone above the screen. They're working with Belkin on some of these little stands for that. But yeah, place it above your monitor and your Mac picks up the fact that you have your iPhone and uses it as the webcam. Really smart. They also showed off something called Desk View, which uses the wide-angle lens on your iPhone to provide a top-down view of your desk in front of you, as though you have a camera above your head. That was super impressive. Now, I'm a big iPad user. I use my iPad mini complete with the Paperlike screen protector daily. Honestly, if you haven't got one of these Paperlikes, go and check it out. It makes the whole process of taking notes on your iPad so enjoyable. I'll put a link in the description so you can check it out. But yeah, I am a big fan of the iPad, which meant iPadOS 16 needed to be really good. Now, according to Craig Federighi, this is a big release for the iPad, yet he started by talking about the weather app that has finally made its way to iPadOS. Great, but not exactly game-changing. He then went on to show us some collaboration features in apps like Pages, where you can share your doc with other people and all collaborate on it at the same time, a little bit like Google Docs. And then he mentioned desktop class apps, which got me very excited because I was thinking, ooh, maybe this is Final Cut Pro. No, he's talking about things like undo, redo, find and merge cards and contacts, files updates where you can now change the extension, view folder sizes, customizable toolbars, basically making iPadOS a bit more macOS-like. It was nothing to do with Pro apps. Things then got a little bit more interesting when he started talking about the M1 only features. So if you've got an iPad Pro with an M1 chip in it or an iPad Air with the M1 chip in it, you'll get access to a few features in iPadOS 16 that you don't on the other iPads. Now, these include things like the ability to increase the pixel density to help with getting more stuff on the screen for split screen multitasking. There's now a virtual memory swap, which means you can now use storage on your iPad as expanded memory. That's very useful, although it's very odd for Apple to talk about memory and RAM, etc. in the iPad. You don't often get that. So the fact they're starting to talk about that is encouraging, I think. And lastly, Stage Manager, which is the thing that I talked about earlier in macOS, that is coming to the iPad if you have an M1 chip. And that means you get all those kind of window management things going on. But more importantly, it finally gives you proper external monitor support for your iPad. And Craig demonstrated this with an iPad Pro and a Studio display, which is actually quite a combo. And basically with Stage Manager and the iPad, you can now move windows between your iPad screen and a external display, which you can't do at the moment. So at the moment, the iPad just mirrors the screen onto the external display, which is completely useless. But this new version allows overlapping windows, and like I say, you can move windows from your iPad to a different monitor. That is going to be very interesting to try out, and I think will make a lot of people happy. Now lastly, we thought there might be one more thing. There wasn't. There was no mention of the Mac Pro, which we genuinely thought, most of us genuinely thought we were going to see a glimpse, even just a preview of that beastly Mac Pro that is coming later this year. Now, this was a completely off-the-cuff reaction to WWDC. There may be some errors in there, I'm sorry if so, but I will be taking some time to think about it a bit more. Make sure you are following my blog. I'll put a link in the description because I'll spend the next few weeks probably writing about the various things we saw today. But I would love to know what you thought about WWDC today or yesterday as you're watching this. Get involved in the comments.